Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Delayed for the first time in U.S. history, President Joe Biden delivered his first State of the Union address in the U.S. Congress on Tuesday, focusing on major domestic challenges and U.S. actions in responding to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. What were some of the key messages in his address? How are Republicans reacting, and what further action will the U.S. take toward the Ukraine conflict? To discuss these issues and also the latest in Ukraine conflict, I'm glad to be joined today by Dr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Peter Kuznick, Professor of History at American University, and Andrew Korybko, Moscow-based American political analyst. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Well, Biden began his speech with Ukraine. Zhao Hai, he repeated that the U.S. position, the U.S. will not send troops to Ukraine, but the U.S. will, there's a new ban on Russian flights, basically from the U.S. airspace. And he talked about find and seize the assets and the richness of the super rich Russians over, probably around the world. So what do you make of these new sanctions and also, the rhetoric mostly, I would say?
Well, I think it's very clear President Biden wanted to present America as strong in the ongoing crisis and wanted to escalate the situation further to show that the U.S. continued support of Ukraine because Ukraine is currently under attack. And also, this is very important because at this point, the U.S. is very much divided by the two parties, and they have different opinions almost on everything. But because of the Putin's attack on Ukraine, now they have to unite. And this is probably the easier part for Biden's speech during that night, because on this issue, there's no difference, basically. And he could show his leadership on this particular issue, the strengths of the U.S., and also the measures that he's taken to show that his administration is taking this seriously and leading the way in terms of the democratic states.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, you are in Washington, D.C. So what's the public response or media response to Biden's policies toward this Ukraine crisis?
The public is very united on this. Vladimir Putin has done something that Biden himself could never have achieved. He's united the American people on something, and the American people are horrified by this invasion. You have to remember, Americans have a very short memory and a short attention span. So this invasion, coming after various American invasions, should seem not quite so stark and stunning, but the Americans are very, very upset that an invasion would take place of this sort at this time. And it seems like pure naked aggression on Putin's part. There's been years of demonization of Putin in the American media. And what's happened now is that Putin has fulfilled the most negative image of himself in the U.S. and has lived down to what Americans were saying. And so the Americans are united in seeing this as a war crime, as seeing this as an illegal invasion, and seeing this as a potential humanitarian catastrophe. And there's great unity. Even the people who were sympathetic to Russia's position about NATO expansion, even the people who were sympathetic to Putin's position about Ukraine not joining NATO, even they have been strongly condemning this action. So that's given Biden a chance in the State of the Union address in order to further unite the people on this basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andrew, you are in Moscow. So what do you make of these, say, Biden's policies and also, this crackdown on the super rich, like billionaire Russian people? Will that help somehow sway the opinion or the idea or the operation in the Ukraine battlefield?
I don't believe that it's going to have any effect on Russian policymaking, and that's because I'd like to clarify the Russian perspective of events, just for the audience to consider and independently reaching their own conclusions. While on the surface, this looks in a way like how the other colleagues have described it, from the Russian perspective, it's actually altogether different. If you review President Putin's speeches on the 21st of February, when he recognized the breakaway Donbas Republic as independent, and the 21st of February, when he announced Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, that's what it's officially called here, you'll see, and mind you, they're available to read on the official Kremlin website, that there was a lot more to this than meets the eye or is being officially reported, widely reported in the West. To very quickly simplify that, Russia views this actually as an existential missile crisis. President Putin shared his concerns about the deployment of U.S.'s so-called anti-missile systems and strike weapons near his borders. President Putin had previously expressed concern that these could neutralize Russia's secondary strike capabilities. And on the 21st of February, when announcing the campaign, he stunned his fellow Russians by revealing that NATO, according to him and his intelligence sources, had been building military infrastructure in Ukraine in anticipation of a secret attack against Russia that he implied would follow the planned neutralization of his country's nuclear second strike capabilities. That's why his stated war aims are several. The first is to ensure the human rights and security of indigenous Russian people in Donbass. The second is to, as he phrased it, denazify Ukraine. Long story short, that basically means changing the perspective of how Ukrainians have come to view Russia. He believes that this has been influenced by World War II Nazi propaganda, glorification of such war criminals, and U.S. NGOs and U.S. government and Western government influences. The other reason he's commenced this campaign is to ensure that alleged NATO infrastructure in Ukraine will never be used to attack Russia. That's why over 1,300 Ukrainian military installations have been destroyed, according to the Ministry of Defense. And the final, and perhaps most important, in the long term, is to ensure that Ukraine never joins NATO, because that would definitely cross a Russian red line, and that's apparently why he was pressed to act. The last thing I want to say is President Putin gave diplomacy a chance from December onwards. He shared his security guarantee request with the United States, no strike weapons on his borders, no NATO expansion, including no NATO expansion into Ukraine, and returning to the military status quo of the 1997, now defunct Russian NATO founding pact. Unfortunately, the U.S. and NATO did not take his red wine serious, and President Putin dramatically said that if we don't act now, the war is unavoidable. We have to act. And that's why he acts from the Russian perspective.
That's probably okay. In a sense, the diplomacy failed probably. Peter, speaking to a Geneva disarmament meeting, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the West must not build military facilities in any countries of the former Soviet Union. What do you make of that demand?
It's not one that at this point, with the gun held to the head of the West, that they were going to acknowledge. Russia had legitimate security concerns. Putin has been stating this consistently since 2007 in his Munich speech. And in 2018, again said, listen to us now. But the West was not listening. What's happened that's different now is that the West was finally listening. That by putting 100,000 troops and more at the border, he had gotten the world's attention about how seriously he considers this issue. And Biden and others were talking about the need to negotiate about missiles, about troop movements, about other arms concerns and stability concerns. And Putin should have, for the first time, the West was really talking about national security concerns of Russia's and taking them seriously. Putin should have declared victory. He should have said, we've got you agreeing to talk about a lot of these issues. Now's the time for diplomacy. Pull those troops back. The things he was saying were pretty, we wondered about his mental stability. This is not a Nazi regime. This is not a regime of drug dealers. Ukraine is an independent country, as the Chinese recognize. You have to remember that China's got a lot of economic ties to Ukraine, and China has good relations with Ukraine, and China affirmed Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. And so China was in a good position because they also recognized legitimacy
This
of
is
Russia's concern about NATO expansion.
right, Peter.
So
This is exactly the question I'm going to ask. Actually, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a phone conversation with his Ukrainian counterpart, and Ukrainian Foreign Minister is believed to ask the Chinese side to get involved and to help seek a diplomatic solution. As you said, China is a good position. Do you think China can play like a positive role to bring the Russians and the Ukrainians, probably Europeans and Americans too, to find a non-violent solution, a peaceful solution?
The person who was doing the most to try to achieve that was Macron from France, but he failed, unfortunately. I think Xi Jinping is the best person to do that. I mean, Wang Yi can do it, but I would like very much to see Xi play a very aggressive role. He's trusted to some extent by both sides. He's got good relations with both sides. Certainly, Putin will listen to him. He recognized the legitimacy of a lot of Russia's concerns. So I would think that he's the one person at this moment who can end this before it turns into a humanitarian catastrophe, into a
Yes. Zhao Hai, from the Chinese side, do you see China now in a very good position probably to talk to the Russian side, the Ukrainian side, and also China probably also enjoy this, I would say, the trust to talk to the European countries, maybe including Washington here?
Well, the answer is yes. Before we go there, I think I want to make one point very clear, which is, based on the two speakers talking about the current situation, we know that we're in this clear security dilemma, which on one side, the Russian side, that they see imminent threat and they launched a preemptive war against that threat. And because of that, NATO, United States responded with more threats. And because they think that the frontier states, particularly the Eastern and Central European states, are under Russian threat. So now both sides feel that they're insecure, and the situation is going to continue to escalate until one side achieve absolute security, which is impossible because the other side will never feel safe. So I think in that scenario, China, of course, can play a constructive role to ensure both sides find a common solution that is effective, equal, and also long-lasting. However, before we go there, I think there's one very important precondition, which is that the United States should not interfere in the negotiation process too much, because right now it seems like the U.S. has a stake in escalating, hype this situation instead of quiet it down and de-escalate, because right now they're sending arms and they're arming the Ukrainians to fight more, and some of the situations, particularly the sanctions, severe sanctions, are actually forcing the Russians to even move further to escalate the situation. So again, I think before China can step in and make a difference, it's very important that all sides have, moving towards the same direction, which is wanting this war to stop right now and de-escalate. And each side needs to prepare for concession in this scenario. So that we can reach a deal.
It needs a lot of work and to get everybody on board and agree to de-escalate the situation. Let's shift our attention back to the domestic situation in the United States. As the State of the Union address talked about a variety of issues. So, Peter, what's your takeaway for the State of the Union address here?
Biden came into this with a very, very divided country. After 2 years of COVID, 2 years of the pandemic, 2 years of people going out of their way to avoid contact, social contact, schools closing, almost 1 million people dead from COVID in the United States. This has been the topic number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the United States for 2 years. And the American people are tired. On top of that, the economy took a bad hit. What's happening now is that COVID is receding. It's less of a concern. We seem to be beating COVID at the moment, although there's never any guarantee there won't be a new wave. The economy is relatively strong. It's been growing rapidly. Wages have increased. The problem is that inflation has been undermining the wage increases. So even though most people themselves are doing okay, there's a lot of concern about the strength of the economy. Unemployment is down at 4%, which is very, very low. So Biden wants to shift the conversation. The mood in America is very dark right now. And so Biden, as a result, Biden's approval ratings are quite low. The only one who was this low when he gave the first State of the Union address was Trump. And so it's a very divided country now. Biden tried to sound positive. He tried to sound optimistic. He tried to change the focus of Americans so that first the unity about Ukraine, and then trying to rally the Americans behind the programs, because the programs he was articulating are individually very, very popular. I mean, taxing the rich, that's always popular and very needed in the United States. Child care, elderly care, social benefits. You know, these are all things that are very popular, but Biden is up against a Republican Party that's committed to defeating him on every one of these. Plus, he's got two people in his own party, two corrupt Democrats who are also sabotaging him. So politically, he's got a weak hand, but he's at least trying to do something positive on the domestic front.
Well, Andrew, obviously now is a low point in terms of approval rating for President Biden, and also this midterm election is upcoming very soon. So, inflation obviously is one of the priorities to deal with. I mean, how big a problem for the Democratic Party and also for the Biden government?
I actually agree with what the previous expert had said, that inflation is a very serious issue. The government is having difficulty maintaining that, controlling that, and reducing it. Hence, President Biden's very ambitious proposals that he revealed during the State of the Union address, which, as the prior expert had confirmed, were very well received by the American people. I mean, everything that President Biden said makes a lot of sense on the surface, but it's been more difficult to implement in practice, particularly partisan deadlock in Congress. Those two Democratic members that have been holding up President Biden's agenda, they are definitely creating very serious troubles for him. The longer that there is a lack of a resolution, the more uneasy and restless average get, and continues to bite. It takes a huge chunk out of their paychecks, and it pretty much undermines everything that he's trying to achieve, not just economically, but also in other policy agenda as well. Because if the Democrats aren't able to do pretty well the midterms, and many people are concerned about their political prospects, principally due to inflation, now that the COVID issue seems to be receding for now, they're...
Okay, it seems like we lost Andrew there. So, Zhao Hai, obviously, do you think the proposals and also basically the proposed bills, basically, President Biden are asking to send it to my desk, I will sign, will, maybe once approved, will that resolve this inflation challenge over there?
The answer is no. I mean, in the short term, there's very little actually the current government could do to subdue the inflation. And there are many factors are at work right now. And actually, Republicans are comparing the current era with the late 1970s, early 1980s. And they're basically comparing the Biden administration with the Carter administration and thinking that this is a failed administration that have a lot of policies that are liking the late 1970s. One of the things that we need to talk about is that, the current situation, actually Biden during his speech blamed the situation to natural disaster like COVID, not his policy. But the Republicans actually stick that to his policy. For instance, the Democrats' policy of American Rescue Plan, which infused close to $2 trillion into the system, which caused probably the hyperinflation. And also the putting attack on Ukraine, actually Republican thinking that this is probably because of the Green New Deal that the Democrats are pushing, because they are spending money and shifting towards renewable energy instead of issuing more license to domestic oil and gas exploration. So right now, there's such a difference between the two parties in terms of the cause of the current problem, including inflation, including the jobs, including racial relations, and also including foreign policy. It's very hard to find a common ground. And Biden's speech trying to bring the two parties together. However, other than commonly blaming Russian policy, Putin himself, there's no other common ground to be found at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, divided society and also politics here. Peter, on manufacturing in America, President Biden said, quote, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure, more innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. How realistic is that? How difficult is it to realize such a, let's say, a scenario or a hope?
Well, we know that that kind of economic nationalism is always very popular. Trump played upon that more aggressively than anybody. Biden is doing that now. And the reality is we're in an integrated global world with a global economy. And the answer has got to be, instead of economic nationalism, finding a way to live together peacefully. Now, Biden had come to office surrounded by a lot of advisors from the Center for New American Security, including Kurt Campbell. He included people in this administration as top advisors who were the architects of the Asia pivot under Obama and under Trump and now under Biden. The real focus was going to be confronting and combating China, was going to be the focus of the Biden foreign policy, seeing China as the main adversary, main competitor. However, what's happened now with Ukraine and what's been going on for months has shifted the American focus away from China to Russia. And that was not what was intended by the Biden administration. So this kind of approach, building up American manufacturing in some ways is a good thing, because American manufacturing has been in decline in certain ways since the 1950s. So this is not something new. And investing productively in that way can regenerate jobs in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, places where we should have more productive manufacturing. The economy's moved increasingly toward finance and service and away from manufacturing. So that could be good, but it doesn't have to be seen as an opposition to relying on China and others. If we could mend relations, then that would be, we could do both.
Yes. Andrew, speak of that, Biden also promised to buy American. People from outside the U.S. would call that protectionism. Probably even Canada and Mexico would not be happy with that. What do you make of that?
I make out of it as very curiously, we do see a lot of policy and strategic continuance between the Trump and Biden administrations. As the earlier expert had said, the Biden administration seemed very poised to, as some American foreign policy hawks phrase it, contain China or decouple from China. But the events in Eastern Europe unexpectedly changed that grand strategic focus. At the same time, though, President Biden almost felt, I believe the Biden administration was compelled by circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic to retain a lot of his predecessor's economic policies to a certain extent. Granted, he does want to change them with the proposed legislation, but since that has not been successfully implemented, he's pretty much building off of what his predecessor did. And considering the unprecedented context in which everything is happening, the COVID-19 pandemic, the events in Europe that are creating the worst security crisis since World War II, according to some descriptions, it's going to be very difficult for President Biden to decisively change course. And I believe that explains why he's sticking to a rebranded variation of the America First or Make America Great Again economic plan. I mean, there are differences between President Biden and former President Trump, but you do see a very strong and curious spirit of continuity there, as well as with the American Grand Strategy that was initially supposed to confront China, but now is finding itself a little bit taken off guard and forced to more decisively react to events in Europe, whereas the United States had, up until this point, up until recent months, almost thought that Europe was not going to be all that dynamic. So I think that we're in a really interesting territory here, both globally and domestically, and that's going to further complicate President Biden's agenda, as well as the Democrats' prospects heading into the midterm elections. So there's definitely a lot to watch, but it's important to understand why things are proceeding along the trajectory, and that is to a large extent due to circumstances beyond any single individual control. So I think that should be kept in mind by all observers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zhao Hai, from a Chinese perspective, if you look at the U.S. Biden administration's practice, even on the rhetoric right now, like manufacturing in the United States, basically, very similar to the Trump administration bringing back the manufacturing, or previously the Obama administration, and now Buy American, basically focusing on the local this manufacturing chain instead of relying on foreign chain supply chain over there. What do you make of that? Especially if you look at the trade between the two countries, Washington is also talking about, probably new tariffs on the Chinese imports.
Well, I think there are two misperceptions. Number one, I want to emphasize, I actually talked about this in previous programs, that American manufacturing is not in decline. Again, not in decline. Actually, Americans are losing manufacturing jobs, but that doesn't mean that American manufacturing sector is not strong. Actually, they continue to grow, and in terms of value created, they still ranked very top, probably number one in the world. And over the years, because their increased efficiency and they climb up the value chain, they actually shed some of the jobs and move that overseas. That's because those are lower paying, low level kind of manufacturing jobs. Now they want those jobs back. That means that they need to lower the wages to compete with overseas manufacturing. However, Biden said that they're not going to lower the cost. They're not going to lower the wage, but just lower the cost. What does that mean? That does not, seems to me, can practically work through that pipeline and actually make that work. So I think from economic perspective, it's not viable.
Mm-hmm. Well, during the speech, President Biden mentioned China twice, basically in the context of economic competition internationally over there. Some people would say, for those who are concerned with the China-U.S. relationship, who want to have a sustainable, if not entirely stable relationship, people feel a bit relieved. Zhao Hai, do you feel also relieved?
No, I don't think so. And I think that in the short run, probably the U.S. will spend more time and pay more attention to European theater. However, if you listen to high officials from the White House, the U.S. never took their eyes off China, and they continue to focus on China. In February, actually, they published the new Indo-Pacific strategy, and we're still waiting for the Indo-Pacific economic framework. So overall, I think the U.S. strategy continues to be competing with China in terms of technology, and they're fighting for their future. So I don't think that they shift their attention, and I think the competition will continue, particularly in the tech era, and also including supply chains.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, it's less than 1 minute.
Well, I think, here's my hope, that Xi Jinping takes the initiative to mediate the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and then is seen so positively that Biden will reach out to China with a new initiative of friendship rather than the plans for competition and confrontation that he came into office with. So I mean, the immediate crisis in the world is the war, and a war that has the potential to escalate, a war that is a war that the United States is confronting the other major nuclear power in the world. Many of us are very frightened about the potential. Putin is making nuclear threats. He's showcasing his nuclear missiles. I mean, these are not idle threats right now, so we're very concerned about that.
We have to stop there, Peter. With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. To continue following the latest developments in Ukraine, you can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Jinduo. Thanks for being with us.